So, where were we? We were talking about course policy. So it'll be a synchronous sessions along with pre-recorded video aspect to it. I know it says WebEx, but we're doing Discord as far as I'm aware, so long as everything works fine and dandy. So attendance is by and large mandatory. This is primarily going to be because I want to make sure that all of you guys are doing the in-class assignments. So the in-class assignments, I think I mentioned, are going to start next week, along with the first homework assignment, which will be assigned. Uh, these in-class assignments will be for credit, so that's by and large going to count for your attendance aspect to it. It is worth a portion of your grade, so make sure you're showing up to uh, those lectures just so you guys are able to come on, see what's going on with regard to how the software works, learn about whatever we're talking about that day, and then from there we can kind of be able to, you can show to me that you guys are understanding the topics enough such that you'll be able to complete the homework reasonably. So that's mostly the reason behind us having uh, the mandatory synchronous sessions. Um, Most announcements will be posted through Web Campus if it's something big, but I'll try to keep a lot of stuff at least coinciding on Discord as well. Um, Homework assignments, so homework is due the date that it's listed on the syllabus. Make sure you guys are turning that in on time. I'll try to get something where you could turn it in via Web Campus up and running. There will be a late penalty if it is not turned in the day that it is assigned. So it says there late assignments will only be accepted within 2 days of the due date and will be subjected to a 50% penalty. So make sure that you guys are coming in and working on or doing those homework assignments just so that you'll be able to get credit for it. So the in-class assignments, kind of explaining it a little bit more in detail. So the first half of the class is going to be devoted to going through the topics, any sort of questions that you guys might have. And then the second half is going to be going through those in-class assignments that I mentioned. So you'll have about half of the class time to work on that in-class assignment. So kind of like the latter half of the class, depending on how long the lecture takes. So some of this might kind of depend on how well you are and how diligent you work on that assignment. So um, I would probably say, and it'll kind of depend on how things go, but by and large, I would like to make sure that you guys are putting in effort with regard to these assignments. If you don't totally get it, then we can definitely have a discussion about it and kind of talk our way through whatever the issues you might be having for that assignment. So it won't be like super strict, but just make sure that you guys are diligently working on it, not on Facebook or some other crap. In terms of the tests, so the first test will be mostly creating a 3D model of either some given parts or parts, and the second test is going to involve more so using your 3D modeling by that, at least the 3D modeling knowledge by that point, and likely creating an assembly as well as a 2D drawing. So we'll kind of get into the 2D drawings more so when we talk about things for next lecture. So the test will typically last up to around 2 hours. So, I mean, depending on circumstances, it could be a little bit more, it could be a little bit less, depending on how efficiently you guys are able to get it done, whether or not factors like that happen. And like I mentioned, try to have a webcam if you can, just so I'll be able to proctor it a little bit more effectively. There will be one project near the end. That's going to be related to kind of collection of all the stuff that you guys have learned. So that's going to be related to kind of creating a 3D model, building the assembly of whatever you might have to assemble. There likely will be several parts to it. Providing drawings of kind of the assembly and the individual parts, and potentially a simulation, depending on if we sort of get into that aspect of SolidWorks. It does have a simulation software embedded in it, like some other 3D modeling programs, but we'll kind of play it by ear a little bit. So in terms of the grade breakdown, 30% for homework, 15 for in-class assignment, 30% for tests, and 25 for the project. So make sure you guys are doing the homework assignments. Those are important, along with the in-class assignments as well. So I mean, nothing is really insignificant. I would definitely harp on making sure you guys are doing those assignments. College of Engineering has details about coronavirus and just resources with regard to that. Cheating, I mean, we have this Discord here, so there's going to be a lot of discussion between you guys if you act on it. Just make sure you guys aren't doing anything stupid or kind of talking to each other and literally getting too much information from each other unless something happens, like maybe a part got lost or something like that, and then we have to kind of make do with what we can. So just try not to do it, guys. Academic misconduct, I mean, a lot of this stuff in the syllabus, just kind of glance it over. We do have an academic tutoring center. I know that a lot of those details, or a lot of that, I believe is being done online in some aspect. I can likely provide more information with regard to that, depending on how much information is in this academic success link. And there's also the Writing Center and the Rebel Mail. None of that is really too important for this class. Okay. Anybody got any questions about the syllabus? Nothing really too crazy, so hopefully all of that is pretty standard. Let's see about hopping over to the lecture today. Change windows. Cool. All right. Are you guys able to see the lecture slides here? Hopefully.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, perfect. So most of this is just going to be a really basic introduction about sort of kind of how Solidworks works, just in a general aspect. So a lot of what we're doing kind of from the ground up is going to be creating technical drawings. So technical drawings are really just going to be used where there's a lot of detail in standard conventions that are added to these drawings. So it's not just going to be a rough sketch or anything. It's going to include dimensions, symbols, other interpretations, or rather other related information that will give you more details with regard to what's going on with the geometry that you're working with, whether it be two-dimensional or three-dimensional. So a lot of these are going to be considered technical drawings where they're differing from just common drawing, which is kind of what I just mentioned a moment ago about how there's more purpose to these technical drawings. There's a lot more stuff that's going on with regard to them. So these are typically what you're going to see in manufacturing or any of that, where you're actually giving those sorts of documents, those drawings, to someone to either make those parts or kind of give a better understanding to those people about what you want to have made. So as you might expect, it has to have lots of detail behind it. It needs to show what you're actually talking about. I mean, if there's missing dimensions, then you're kind of lacking a bit of detail there. So engineering graphics, they're just a visual means of being able to kind of represent what's going on with construction and what is being manufactured. So typically with regard to SolidWorks, we're going to be doing a lot of two-dimensional drawing first. So we're going to make some sort of two-dimensional drawing, whether it be in a Cartesian or cylindrical plane. And then we're going to do something else to it. So either extrude it, so turn it into some sort of three-dimensional object, or possibly create other shapes that are happening within whatever geometry we're trying to make. So just like what I said, we have some kind of two-dimensional object that we're going to extrapolate into a three-dimensional object. Typically, we're going to have some kind of length and width, and then we're creating height to it or creating some sort of depth to it. So you can kind of see here, it's just really basic drawing. this is actually pretty cool because if you're kind of looking at it, I guess from the like staring in the negative z direction, that's going to be your base. So it's kind of being extruded outward in the negative direction. And that's going to be a lot of how our geometry starts. We're creating some sort of really basic shape, extruding it, or at least some really basic two-dimensional shape, and then extruding it in some manner to create something with 3 dimensions to it. And then from there, we can sort of do other uh, variations, other little fine-tuning to that specific geometry. This is just going over right-hand rule a little bit. I'm sure you guys have probably already heard it by and large, so it's just a way to represent our axes. It's not really going to be too relevant for what we're talking about here, so long as you have a good basis of our Cartesian system, which is by and large what we're going to be dealing with a lot of our drawings. Yes, so the origin in Solidworks is typically represented by just 3 groups of blue arrows. And like I said, once we're done with the lecture, I'll kind of start going into this stuff. I'll flip on over to Solidworks and show you guys a lot of this and kind of explain a little bit here and there. But the origin is just going to represent the intersection point of our 3 planes. So the 3 planes are typically labeled as our front plane, our top plane, and our right plane. And we'll go a little bit more into that once we start getting into the software itself. So in terms of cylindrical coordinates, sometimes you'll have to use this with regard to any sort of circular shapes. So a lot of circular designs that deal with cylinders or potentially holes will start getting into a lot of that as well, where some shapes might have either circular components to them or semicircular, anything of that nature. A lot of the standard CAD is represented by just primitives. So this is kind of what I'm talking about in a very general sense about how when we first begin a sketch or a creation, we're typically going to have some kind of primitive, whether it be, let me go back, whether it be a box, some sort of cylinder. I don't think there's going to be any toruses that we're working with, but it might be a little something kind of that idea that you need to work with for geometry. But they are just the building blocks of what we'll be dealing with. So kind of get a sense of how to create these sorts of things and then extrapolate, kind of use those primitives to create more complex geometries. So basic geometry, I mean, we're going to be dealing typically a lot with those basic sketches. So those basic sketches are going to be our 2-dimensional surfaces that we're dealing with. And those are going to be derived by creating lines or arcs, circles, any of those sorts of things, 1-dimensional curves to them. So from there, once we have those sorts of drawings on at least a specific plane, we can create other geometries from that. 3-dimensional geometries, so solids, things that actually have some form of volume to them. A lot of what's going on here is going to be things related to certain restrictions that SOLIDWORKS kind of imposes on just a lot of like the basic geometry that you guys are going to create sometimes. So typically you can, perhaps if we're looking at maybe this very first one, it's where it says point at the origin. So what's nice is that the origin kind of is a fixed region that you can initiate from. You can say, well, maybe I want to create a cylinder starting at the origin as opposed to, or rather with the center of the very like base circle starting at the origin. Well, what's nice is that you can literally just grab the circle tool, start it right on the origin, as opposed to having to click in specific regions or map it somewhere else, kind of like a process. It's a pretty simple way of doing it. SOLIDWORKS is pretty good, and it has been for the most part recently, pretty good at being able to assume where you're going to be placing certain points. So a lot of these things you're going to be seeing quite frequently with regard to coincidence or vertical, horizontal, tangent. So these are just sort of, I don't want to say modifiers, but they're kind of restrictions that SolidWorks imposes on specific lines. So what's nice is that you can create these sorts of things as well. Let's say you want to have, if we're looking at this bottom middle picture, let's say you want to create another line that's here. And SolidWorks will typically do pretty well at making sure that the line is parallel to the top one, but let's say you drew it just a little bit off. Well, two options there is you can either recreate the line, but you can also impose a horizontal restriction on that line, making sure that it's going to be completely horizontal. And that ends up kind of aligning with lots of other uh, restrictions that it'll impose. So generally that is a nice way that you can say, I want these two lines to maybe be equal to each other. Well, you can do that as well if it doesn't already impose that restriction on it. Coincident is just saying that we have things that coincide with each other, no duh, but things that are either right next to each other or beside each other. It's usually indicated in cases where you perhaps, I guess as an example, you might have a line that would be tangent to the circle. You could say, and it wouldn't even have to be tangent specifically, that would be another restriction it could give, but you could just say, well, maybe it goes right through it. Well, any point where you have an intersection between that line and that other geometry, say a circle, would be considered coincident. So that can be pretty useful whenever you're dealing with certain sketches, whether or not they're misbehaving. This kind of just shows a general idea of taking more basic shapes, kind of like our two-dimensional primitives, I guess you could say, so just circles, rectangles, squares, any of those sorts of things, and being able to create three-dimensional objects from them. And this will be kind of in part what we talk about next week, about creating those sorts of shapes and solids. This discusses a bit more of those constraints that I was mentioning. So we might have ones where we want two lines to be vertical, possibly parallel to each other if we need two lines to be completely parallel to each other. Perhaps we want lines to be, or two lines to be perhaps perpendicular to each other as well. We're able to do that if one is horizontal, one is vertical, it will impose that. So it's kind of hard to see, but you'll see two different little boxes, technically four, but you'll see two different little boxes kind of right above that horizontal line. One of them is indicating coincident, where we have the vertical line meeting the horizontal line, and then we have another one indicating that the lines are perpendicular to each other. So sometimes we need to add that extra constraint there in order to make sure that some of our dimensions are satisfied or defined. Usually we like things called fully defined sketches because it makes sure that there's no weird aberrations with regard to our drawing. I mean, sometimes, and you probably will encounter this if you haven't worked with SolidWorks too much, I know I do it plenty often as well, but there will be plenty of times where you might have to make a really small adjustment to what you're working with, and then all of a sudden, like, all your dimensions blow up and you get this really funky shape that you had no intention of creating to begin with. That will happen sometimes, but that's why having either a fully defined sketch or just kind of understanding, making sure all of your constraints are met and all of your dimensions are defined kind of eliminates that possibility. And also concentric, just saying that we have two circles that kind of start at the same origin, or same center point, I guess you could say. No, look, there's more constraints as well. So sometimes we'll have tangency. So tangency can be a case both with arcs and with just a circle in general. So if we have a line that's tangent to a circle or an arc, it's just meeting it at that one specific point. Kind of like what I mentioned, ones where they're lines with equal length, equal radius, any sort of equality between the two, midpoint perhaps. So Maybe you have something where you not only want it to, where you want it to, say, be perpendicular, but you also want it to be the midpoint of the of the perpendicular line segment. So that is also a constraint that you can give. That one you'd probably have to be a little bit careful of, depending on some of your other constraints, or depending on how a lot of your measurements are defined, because doing so might create other funky things, and it potentially might interact not in a nice fashion with some of the other constraints that you have. So you want to have a good constrained sketch, but you also don't want to over-constrain it. Over-constraining your sketch could lead to situations where you have erroneous zones, places where it's just like, hey, I don't know what you want here, I'm just going to blow up. And that will happen every now and again from time to time. So just sort of utilizing the functions that SolidWorks has in place to be able to kind of fix those situations. And we'll go through those sorts of things. It will happen, and there are ways that we can kind of sort through them. Understanding that sketches could be symmetric to each other, so we can see here we have some sort of circle with small little sketch on the inside, kind of these two boxes. This line of symmetry is going through them, and you can add lines of symmetry as well. So kind of being able to define how, hey, this side might be symmetric to this other side. And also just intersection points, so places where they will intersect. Go figure. Geometric entities, so a lot of this is just very basic geometry that I know a lot of you guys already know about, but just kind of understanding those concepts of geometry will really help you be able to work with a lot of your sketches. And I'm not going to throw like proofs at you guys or anything like that, but like just having a basic grasp of those sorts of things is going to benefit you a whole lot. And kind of understanding what might be going on with that sketch. And then just other details regarding arcs, so how it's just a portion of a circle. And this is kind of cool. It shows a little bit of a breakdown here with regard to center point arcs, tangent arcs, and 3-point arcs. So the cool thing about SolidWorks is that there's not always going to be one tool that is totally right for the job. Occasionally we might have several tools where we can do all sorts of different things, or rather accomplish the same goal with more than just one tool, or rather than just using one tool. Okay, is there any questions with regard to anything before I kind of do just a brief overview of SolidWorks in general, kind of how to utilize it? Cool. All right, cool. Then if that is the case, let me see about going on to SolidWorks in general. Change window. I believe it's this guy. Alrighty. So I already loaded up SolidWorks just so we didn't have to wait for like a good 10 minutes, because it does take a hot minute sometimes. However, let me just open up a new file just so you guys have a good idea of kind of how it functions on load. So typically you'll just get the splash screen, and then it will give you this menu. So this menu is just kind of going to ask you, what are we going to be doing today? So generally speaking, you're going to always want to start off with a part. If you already have several parts, and you are trying to create, say, an assembly, we're going to go over there. And the assembly is going to just be a way for us to take several parts, several things that we have already created within SolidWorks or other 3D modeling softwares, but by and large, might as well do it through SolidWorks, since we're kind of going through this whole ordeal just to get it started in general. We're going to be using just SolidWorks parts. From there, you can create drawings of your parts or assemblies. This stage will typically come a bit later, once we start getting into kind of like the nitty-gritty of how to actually create drawings for your parts. It's pretty easy for the most part, just a couple clicks of a button, so long as you have a part that's made. So once you have that, you can just go on over to part. So just open up a part, and kind of like what we discussed, we're going to start off with a sketch. So we'll typically want to hit sketch, and then as you can see, just those planes that I was kind of briefly mentioning earlier. I don't know if any of you guys already have it open. Not like you really have to be following along right now, but just in terms of general standard ways of doing certain things. Middle click on your mouse, hopefully you have one, it's going to rotate the object, and if you hit Control middle click, you can move it around. But enough of that. Let's say we want to just create a general sketch. So let's say I want to start on the top plane, so kind of this horizontal plane with us. What's nice is that once you click on it, it'll automatically bring you kind of in that two-dimensional view of that sketch that you're going to work with. And just as I mentioned before as well, I really have nothing planned with this, so I'm just kind of going off script with regard to what we might want to create. Let's say we just want to create, like, I don't know, just a standard, like a standard box. So what's nice is that usually you'll have these arrows, and they'll give you a lot of drop-down menu options. So corner rectangle is just going to say, hey, I'm defining the two opposing corners to each other. Center rectangle means that it's almost kind of like a circle. You can say, hey, I'm going to start at the origin, and you can see that little yellow marker just defining how it's coincident to the origin. Then I can kind of drag it out, almost like how you would do with a circle. You're just saying, hey, here's my origin, and then I'm going to define whatever the radius of that object is. So you'll define that, and then you just have a standard rectangle in this case. Smart dimension here, right next to exit sketch, is going to basically be your best friend. This is going to be your way of defining however your dimensions are created with regard to whatever you're trying to make. So let's say I wanted this to be, it'll just kind of throw a random dimension in there just based upon whatever the code is saying. But let's say I wanted this to be, just say 50 millimeters. You don't have to add millimeters there. What you can do is you can define certain things. Go back to the sketch. Come on. There we go. And I want this to be, let's say, 75. So the smart dimension is really a good way of just getting all your dimensions settled, making sure that everything is defined how you want it to be defined. As you can see from this kind of drop down or drop up, I don't know, little menu, you can pick standard measurements. So mmgs, so just millimeters, grams, your typical SI units. And then you can also do inches, pounds, seconds, so a lot of kind of the more US, like imperial system measurements. We will be going back and forth between them, so make sure that you're paying attention to what Solidworks is stating with regard to how it's defining its measurements, or how whatever the measurements might be on the assignment itself. So let's say we have this shape here, which is just 50 by 75. Let's say I want to have it be, let's say I just want to create this as a box. We can go over here to features, which has a lot of different stuff here. Hopefully you guys can kind of see it for the most part. It'll be a little bit better once we're kind of discussing these topics next week when everybody has the software installed and kind of up and running. But let's say we just want to create more of a box shape, some kind of rectangular prism. So it'll typically define things by about 10 millimeters or whatever you're working with. And then you can just extrude it however much you feel necessary, however much you need. This is going to be how you generally will create most of your primitive geometries. So a lot of how you're going to be creating some sort of three-dimensional shape to start off whatever you're working with. So there, we made a boring box. Let's just make this 50. Just make it nice. So, okay. Let's say I messed up. Let's say I wanted to further edit the sketch. I made a mistake. I want to go back and I need to make some adjustments to those. So in order to do that, you can actually go to a little drop down for that. So when you create some sort of three-dimensional object, it's going to allow you to go back and edit basically anything you need to. Thankfully, nothing is set in stone. It'll be a pain to change every now and again, at least when you're starting off and kind of need to kind of understand the UI a little bit more. But by and large, you will be able to adjust your sketches as well as any sort of adjustments that you need to any of your features. So whatever kind of creates possibly an extrusion, a cut, anything like that. So let's say I want to adjust this dimension. Let's say I want to make this more of a cube as opposed to just a box. I can just go back to the sketch. So actually, let me do that from the start. I can click on that little drop-down menu, and one of two ways. I can either just highlight the sketch, go back to sketch, and then when I hit that button, it'll kind of allow me to re-edit whatever I've already made here. So if I want to create regions where it doesn't actually have any space in it, let's say maybe there's holes in this geometry, or rather some excluded regions, I can create that on the original, and it will just basically extrude that shape upward or in whatever direction I'm picking. So let's say I want to make this a cube instead. So I can just double click on our smart dimension, change it to 50, and now we know that we have just a square here. And when I hit this button, this blue one kind of at the top right, it'll just put in place the our features once again. I can also edit things on really any of these faces. The cool thing is that now that it's created this primitive in this case, or just a geometry in general, some three-dimensional geometry in general, I can create adjustments to really any of those faces if I need to. So keep in mind, this down here was our original sketch. However, if I want to, this face right here, which technically I never made, I never created that as a sketch, I can still sketch on that plane and create other sorts of geometries with it. So let's say I have some sort of cylinder that's coming off of this face, this side that we have now. I can do that. So I can just click on our circle tool, click anywhere on that face, and define it by its radius. You don't have to be really too picky about where you initiate these drawings. Because we have our smart dimension tool, and thankfully it still works even on this other face that really was never one that we had initially sketched to begin with. So I just sort of threw a random radius there, or diameter in this case. Let's say I want it to be more standard. Let's say I want it to be, I don't know, 7.5, 7.5. Oh. So now we have a circle in this case with a 7.5 diameter. Well, let's say this isn't in the exact location that I want it to be in as well. If I'm zooming here as well, I can create dimensions with regard to the center. Let's say it needs to be centered at a specific location. Say I need to have it 10 away from that side. However, it needs to be, if I click it right there, needs to be only 5 away from the very top. So long as you're clicking on the specific region, so make sure if you're doing so you're clicking at least on the center itself, you'll be able to define those dimensions by those specific measurements. And I can do plenty more with this as well. I mean, if need be, I can extrude this, I can cut through this shape if I need to, or if I only need a slot of a certain distance. I can do pretty much any of those, or create any of those features. I mean, if I just have a portion of it coming off of 10 millimeters, I can do that. What's nice is that it can merge the results as well, create something where it's still one piece. We don't have to worry about these things being cut in some manner or them being different parts from each other. So we can create very basic geometries, or we can create even more complex things. A lot of these sorts of things that I just showed are kind of getting into stuff that we're going to be going through more so next week. So let's say instead of doing an extrude, so I might just delete the extrude, but keep the shape, or keep the sketch rather, I can do an extrude cut instead. So as opposed to just creating more to the shape, I can take some of it away. So there's all sorts of different options. If I need it to be a specific distance, I can do that. I can say, well, maybe it needs to be 15 millimeters instead, so it only has to be a specific distance, this slot. Or perhaps I want it to go through the entire shape. I can do that. I can basically have it go through the entire shape until it reaches another surface.
Direction.
And then we'll create something of the sort like this. I don't want to get too far ahead or too much in depth with regard to a lot of these sorts of shapes or any of these sorts of things here, especially considering there's a metric ton of different features that we can create. However,
So
if
Roger, I was on the house like 3 months ago. Wanted
there
her
are
and
any things, then
other
we'll
custom
kind of be
set.
able to go into those things more so next week.
Cool.
In terms of right now,
Another. Oh my god.
does
She
anybody
sent
have
you
any
all
questions?
Yes. So for turning in assignments, are we going to be utilizing like paper space or title blocks or anything?
I am not entirely sure what those are. In terms of turning in assignments, I think what's going to be done, one of two things. Either I'll have you guys just send a lot of that stuff to my email, or I will provide something that you can use, something that you can submit assignments through on Canvas.
Okay, sweet.
That's probably going to be the preferred method, just because for my sanity, I don't think I want to have like 30 emails. Um, Not that it has anything, not that it's anything wrong with you guys. It's just the fact that that's a lot of stuff to sift through, especially with other emails coming in for other related stuff. I'm probably going to do about the same thing for the in-class assignments as well, just to make sure that there's at least one localized place to have those assignments be submitted to. Anything else?
Yes, are you going to be uploading the syllabus required?
So the syllabus is already on Web Campus. I know that much. Syllabus is on Web Campus. In terms of having it in more than one location, I could put the syllabus on here as well on Discord if that's something that you guys would like for me to do. I kind of like it, at least to some degree, just because it's a nice localized place where I'm already having the lectures, so there's no reason to have it somewhere else. What was the other part to your question? Sorry.
Is there going to be like reading any sort of literature?
Probably not. That's why That's why the book is not as required. Um, I was kind of scanning through the book, and a lot of it kind of seems like a bunch of jargon that I don't really think is going to be that helpful, especially for, dang it, I don't have it readily available. But I mean, it's a book that's like 2 inches thick, and it. I feel like a short PowerPoint is going to accomplish way more than any sort of book reading. So I mean, as long as you guys just have access to the PowerPoints, and if there's any questions that you guys have about stuff, definitely either ping me on Discord, send me a DM, any of those sorts of things. Just get my attention in some way. And also, like, I know I kind of mentioned this before, but like, you guys are all here together. And I want to try to be in on that as well. Try to make it so that like we can make this an environment where you guys know how to do all this stuff. You're gonna walk out of here with a pretty darn good understanding of how to do basic basic 3D modeling for a lot of the stuff that you're going to have to do later on in your time with engineering for this class. So I mean that's my goal, at least with regard to that. Sorry, Miranda, I muted you a moment ago, but to answer your question, are there parts of the program you don't want us to play with yet? Honestly, do whatever the heck you want. That sounded kind of rude. Play with it as much as you want. Um, Play around with it, kind of figure stuff out. I would like it if you guys do have access to SolidWorks currently. Um, so you've already done a test run, you already have worked through it and kind of uh, you know that it works. So it's not just like, hey, surprise, it's the day of the lecture and it's not booting up correctly. Um, Definitely mess around with it as much as you'd like. Um, Break things in terms of your own geometry. Don't break the software, but just make sure that you kind of have an idea of what's going on. So you don't just load up the thing, you don't just load up the software, and then all of a sudden you're just staring at it like, I have no idea what to do. Um, as long as you guys kind of have the basic understanding that anytime you're starting up SolidWorks, pretty much the primary thing that you're going to be doing with is creating a sketch, and then sort of creating some sort of three-dimensional geometry from there. And then beyond that, you're going to be able to edit that geometry in some manner or another. Occasionally, probably later on, once we start getting into the idea of assemblies, I might be giving you guys some geometries to work with. So it's going to be something that I'm providing as opposed to you guys building. That's okay. From there, it's going to mostly come down to kind of talking through it. What are our constraints going to be? Kind of the same idea behind just a single part. There's going to be constraints there. There's going to be certain mate requirements where things need to be either concentric or perpendicular to each other or anything like that. Yes, so, the lecture is being recorded right now. There was a there was a short little period of time where it had to go down for me to fix the stupid uh, cap for how many people can be in a call, but I'll just merge those two videos or just post them as a 1 and a 2 and hopefully cut out some of my stupid fumbling with regard to how Discord works. Anything else? Those recordings will likely be on Canvas, just because I need to make sure that they're not going to be obscenely large files, and I'd rather post it in a location where I know it has a good file size upload amount. Because I know Discord is pretty limited, or at least it's somewhat limited unless you have Nitro, which I don't. Was there another question?
Yes. I didn't see it in the syllabus. You had just
Yes.
missed it. Is there like a course schedule that's kind of going to break down all the
There
assignments with
is. Yeah.
tests?
So if you want, I can just do a really quick overview. It's nothing really too crazy. Okay, let me go there, and then right there. So in terms of the, and this is also on this is on Canvas as well. So I mean, this stuff is supplied to you. You guys are going to be able to utilize it just fine, or have the option to check it out. So there's not going to be any homework assignment this lecture. We'll get on that with regard to assigning a homework assignment next lecture. In terms of the breakdown, we're going to start off just by kind of basic creating geometry. So starting with a sketch, being able to define those sketches, seeing how to edit your geometry in any sort of way, and then kind of from that initial sketch creating a geometry and being able to edit it however you deem necessary. Axis of revolution, so being able to possibly take some sort of shape and revolve it around preferably an axis or possibly something else, typically going to be some sort of axis you're going to revolve that shape around. Did it just cut out? What the heck just happened? Am I still here? There we go. That was weird. Oh my gosh, then I gotta put this back up. So share. There we go. Man, it's a good thing we're not doing anything crazy today. First lectures with all this crap going on is pretty much just bug testing. So yeah, beyond that, so beyond Axis of Revolution, we'll start going into being able to mirror or have specific patterns, fillets and chamfers, so either like rounded or kind of more cut off corners, ribs and shells, sweep, loft, and then after that first test, so the first test is going to basically rely on knowledge of all the different ways of creating and editing geometry that you're going to be working with or that you're going to be utilizing for those first couple of weeks. And then beyond that, then we'll start getting into the assemblies, how to create the engineering drawings that I'm going to be providing you guys with. It says pre-recorded videos. I don't know whether or not I'm going to do pre-recorded videos or not in terms of like whether or not I'm going to just give you guys videos or if it'll be a live session. It'll probably be easier if I just do video recordings for all of us, just because time constraints and this is a late class. But by and large, you guys we'll work something out, and I'll probably get like a poll on what you guys think in terms of those sessions later on. We'll work with. Okay, yeah. Here, let me unmute you. Sorry about that.
Figure out alone.
Okay. And then that's pretty much the basis for the syllabus in terms of the schedule. Is there any other questions you guys have with regard to stuff? I know it was reasonable.
Is there? Can you hear me?
Yeah. What's up?
Yeah. Is there anything else you want us to do before next week starts, other than download, like get SolidWorks downloaded and kind of mess around with it?
So what I'm gonna do in the lecture text channel, I'm going to just create a little. You could do that. Just a little message where any of you guys who are having issues can just react to it. So I'll just put a little reaction emoji on it, and I want anybody who does not have SolidWorks up and running on their computer or is still having issues or needs to contact Carrie in some manner, or rather if she hasn't gotten back to you yet with regard to any of those sorts of things, I want you to react to that message. So I'll just do a little basic reaction just so you all have something to click. But that's primarily the first thing that I want. I mean, if you guys don't have access to SolidWorks by next week, it's kind of defeating the purpose. And then it's going to start digging into, I mean, I'm not going to let that happen, but it's going to, or it would end up starting to dig into your guys' grades, which I'm
Sure.
not going to let that happen just because of some BS that's happening with it being backed up or not able to get to it. Like, you guys need this because you're going to be using it not just for this class. You will more than likely be using it for many other classes that require some sort of project or design project. You'll definitely be using it later on when you're doing any sort of senior design or creation type project.
Okay.
And then if anybody has any other questions, you can ask those. So there. So I put it in the lecture text. So that's going to be specifically if you haven't gotten any word back from Carrie with regard to SolidWorks being downloaded. And that's going to be just real necessary information. Aside from that, is there anyone else who is having issues that's not related to Carrie just not having gotten back to you quite yet?
Yeah, hello?
Yeah.
I believe that I think I I think the link expired before I actually, activated it. So can I just contact Carrie again to ask her?
What link are you talking about?
Because I thought it was, because I believe I got an email from Carrie and then it just took me to SolidWorks, but then it just said link was expired, so I didn't really know what was up with that.
That's strange. Yeah, if that's happened and you've already contacted her with regard to that, just put a reaction on that as well, or just click one of the reactions on my message. Just because
You're okay.
I just want to make sure that everybody can feasibly walk in next week and have the ability to, or rather has already had the ability to open up SolidWorks, has no issue doing so, and they can quite easily do it again for any of the following sessions. I mean, hell, I knew I was having some issues like the first time around with regard to just when I downloaded the 2021 version. Like, I think I had the 2018 version, and it's kind of a little clunky sometimes here and there, considering I upgraded it. But I mean, it still functions. Like, as long as you're in a position like that where you just know, like, hey, it's working, it's functional. That's sort of what we want to see, or I want to see rather. Yes, that link as well. I don't. That should work, just because you're just contacting. Oh no, well yeah. So that link right there that Miranda posted, that will be the link that you're going to go to once Carrie has already sent you the info. So once she sends that stuff off, you're going to go to that link that Miranda just provided, and basically it'll allow you to download the software, and then you'll have all the stuff to input. You can download it from there, but you're not going to have your serial number information and any other relevant things, which she's going to provide. So it's important to get a hold of her first, or I guess in this case, once I'm able to kind of get a hold of her and kind of see what the dealio is, why everything's kind of on back order. What else, guys? Unless we're done. So I will by and large stick around for another little bit. I mean, hell, there's 2 hours left, but I mean, obviously, I already told all you guys there's absolutely no feasible way I could have stretched what I just discussed in roughly an hour 3 times that. There's no way I could have done that, and it likely won't be the case, at least for the lecture portion in the future. By and large, um, it's just going to be the lecture portion first, and then beyond that, we're going to be doing our in-class assignments. Considering the purpose of attendance is mostly for that, mostly for the in-class assignments, I'm not going to be like super harping on today's lecture in terms of the attendance aspect. There's really not a whole lot there, but for future lectures, it will be necessary just because you guys are going to need to be there to do those in-class assignments to get credit. So it will be important to show up for those synchronous sessions. So yeah, that's by and large it. Like I said, I'll stick around for another like 10 or so minutes. Just so if you guys do have any questions about anything and you want to kind of verify, double check any of that sort of stuff, I will be here. I mean, and you can always ping me in the Discord, but we're pretty much done for the day. So you guys are totally good to go if you want to.
I have a question.
What's up?
Is Fusion 360 similar to SolidWorks?
I have not played with it, so I unfortunately cannot give you a yay or nay on that. In terms of SolidWorks in general, I would recommend having it just because that's what we're going to be dealing with, and later on, I mean, are you able to create like assemblies and those sorts of things in Fusion 360?
I believe so.
Okay. I haven't played around with it, so it would be preferable to have SolidWorks, at least from my standpoint, just because then there will be little things here and there. But by and large, I mean, if things don't work out, like, or if it's the nth hour and things are still kind of in a state of flux, then I'm not gonna be a pain with regard to that. I'll make sure that, like, at least for the time being, that will be acceptable.
That's perfectly fine.
Cool. Yeah, like I said, it's preferable to have SolidWorks just because so long as we can get things together and Carrie is able to kind of reach out, then that is the preferred option. But if, like I said, if it doesn't work out to be the case, if that's not what ends up happening, or if things kind of go awry, I'm not going to raise a fuss about it. Cool.
I have a quick question.
Yep, what's up?
I know you answered this question earlier even, but my Wi-Fi decided to give out on me. How is homework submission going to work?
So, that I am kind of still working on, but what I am probably planning on doing is having submissions be through Web Campus or Canvas, just because it'll at least be a localized place that I can just go down the list and grade everything accordingly. I prefer that over having 30-some emails in my inbox that I have to sift through, and I know that's kind of a woe is me type thing to say, but like, at least everything will be in one place with like no extra crap going on Web Campus.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Anything else? Alright, cool. Well, unless you guys have anything else that you want to discuss or talk about, you guys are all good to go. Like I said, if there really are any further questions, just shoot it in the discussion. So we'll try to keep this lecture text as related to just lecture topics as much as possible. I'm not going to be too rigid about that. I mean, that's kind of stupid. But if there's any general discussion about just getting stuff set up, that can happen in discussion, and we can kind of go from there. Cool. All right, guys. I will talk to you next week, next Thursday. Take it easy.